One. So we have Dr. Brenda Allen with us today. She's going to be doing a presentation on unconscious bias. But Dr. Allen, she graduated from Howard University, woohoo, yay, and is the Vice Chancellor of Diversity and Inclusion. She's the Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Colorado in the Anschutz Medical Center. In 1989, she joined the CU Denver faculty, I'm sorry.
Boulder.
Yeah, Boulder.
And then, is that on there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You were recruited to CU Boulder in 1989 and joined CU Denver in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. She also has developed a track record for scholarship, teaching, and service in the area of diversity and inclusion. And she has numerous publications and a groundbreaking book called Difference Matters, Communicating Social Identity. It's in its second edition. Good. Always changing.
Yes, yes.
Good.
That's enough.
One other thing, and then I'll let Dr. Allen. She's a gem. I have to be totally honest. And the first time I heard Dr. Allen, actually the second time I heard Dr. Allen speak, I was nervous. And she's a powerful woman. And I went up to her and I said, Dr. Allen, now you all know.
Really?
You all know. But I was like, Dr. Allen, can you please be my mentor? She checked me, basically told me to hold my head up high and that I deserve everything that I get. Thank you, Dr. Allen, for being a mentor and coming out to Denver Water to share your knowledge with us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. That wasn't rhetorical, I really am saying. Good afternoon. I know a lot of speakers kind of greet and then keep it moving, but actually to set the stage for our time together today, this will be interactive. I more and more really resist the idea that I am the sage on the stage, but rather I strive to be the guide on the side, especially because I have the privilege of meeting with groups like you all to discuss these concepts that to a certain degree, we're all already familiar with them. What I appreciate is the opportunity to contextualize them in ways that align with the goals of the institution. And I understand that one of the things you all are focusing on is unity and also inclusivity. And as you will see, and I imagine some of you, have any of you done any unconscious bias, implicit bias training before by raise of hands? Excellent. So you're familiar with the concept. And what I hope to do today is to deepen your understanding about those issues. So with just an hour to do this and acknowledging up front, we won't get it all done. I don't want you to think because you've had this hour together that check, I'm good now with unconscious bias. Rather, I hope that you really will have a clearer sense of what it is and why it matters, as well as what you can do in terms of unconscious bias. I'm going to start, though, before going into what is it, why does it matter, and as I said, another goal will be, by the end of our time together, you will have some specific, explicit strategies and techniques that you can immediately begin to incorporate into your workspace. And also, I would hope, other aspects of your lives. Before I get started, I want to go into, remind me, how can I get back down to the, I think I have to go here. I got it, I think, yeah. I'm gonna show you a short video. And as you look at this video, I want you to think whether or not you have had any experience with implicit or unconscious bias training. Just engage with this video and be prepared to discuss very briefly how you think this is relevant to the topic of unconscious bias. Ready? You think you're ready?
Yes.
You may not realize it, but your brain actually processes information in two very distinct ways. Like when you look at this photo, you can still know she has blonde hair, is physically angry, and likely has some choice words to yell. Without any effort, you experience fast thinking. But if you look at the following problem, something different happens. Sure, you immediately know it's a multiplication problem, and you knew you could solve it if you had the energy, but didn't. If you do try, your muscles will tense, your pupils will dilate, and your heart rate will increase. Now, you experience slow thinking. These two systems of fast and slow thinking dictate much of our perception and reaction in life. Take these lines, for example. It's clear that they're different lengths, but if you measure them, they're actually the exact same length. Even now that you know, System 1, or your fast thinking, can't stop seeing the illusion because it acts automatically. A similar effect is seen here. Which figure is the largest? Again, they're all the same size, but the suggestion of perspective and depth causes your System 1 to interpret the picture as three-dimensional, even though it's on a flat two-dimensional surface. It's making quick work of the available information, and so your conscious System 2, or slow thinking, must compensate after the fact and choose not to believe your intuition or instinct. Want to see your System 2 in action? I'll show you a string of 4 digits. You read them aloud, then add 1 to each of the original digits. If the card reads 3795, the correct response would be 4806. We'll then go to the next card and we'll do the same, followed by the next card. Ready? Go.
Let's hear it.
7243. Oh.
8154
Few people can cope with more than 4 digits, but even harder is add 3. The interesting bit is that though your pupils would have dilated, often blind when you fully engage System 2. Did you notice the color of the text change? Or how about the fact that the numbers completely changed when I put them off to the side? Listen to the following puzzle. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Chances are your System 1 intuition was yelling 10 cents. But this appealing System 1 answer we know is wrong. In fact, the correct answer is 5 cents. Even if you worked out the correct answer, you likely thought of 10 cents along the way. System 1 is trying to work out an answer as quickly and seamlessly as possible, which is extremely beneficial in everyday life. If every activity required full mental effort, it would be exhausting. But knowing this allows us to understand that not all of our first impressions are correct. How many animals of each kind did Moses take into the ark? So few people detect what is wrong with this question that it's been dubbed the Moses illusion. In fact, Moses took no animals. Noah did. Again, our brain invests as little resources as necessary so that things run quickly and smoothly. Because Moses is not abnormal in the biblical context, System 1 unconsciously detects an association between Moses and ark and quickly accepts the question. In a similar way, System 1 generates context without you knowing. Reading each of the following may seem very simple. A, B, C, and approach the bank, and 12, 13, 14. But your brain actually interpreted these ambiguous statements without you ever knowing. You could have read it as A, 13, C, or 12, B, 14, but your brain created the context unconsciously. Also, you likely imagined a woman with money on her mind walking towards a building with tellers. But if the sentence before this was, they were floating gently down the river, the entire scene would have changed because bank is no longer associated with money. Without an explicit context, System 1 quickly generates one based on previous experience. In this case, you've likely visited more banks than rivers, and so the context is resolved accordingly. This ties into a concept called priming. For example, if I said wash, how would you complete this word fragment? Most would see soap, but had I just shown you the word eat, you'd be more likely to see soup. In this way, both eat and wash prime your thoughts. Though System 2 likes to think that it's in charge and knows what's going on, the truth is that priming effects have even been shown to affect and modify behavior. These arise in System 1, and you have no conscious access to them. If you'd like to learn more about the thinking systems in your brain, check out the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which covers it in great detail. I'll put it.
So remember, the assignment was to have a sense of, by looking at this video, of how unconscious bias operates. And our goals, just to repeat, are by the end of our time together, you'll have more clarity in terms of, remember, the title is Unconscious Bias Matters. So the idea is unconscious bias is something that's significant, it matters, and there are many different kinds of matters or issues that we should be aware of. And again, even though I haven't defined it, I think, most of you have some idea, just unconscious bias, right, before I give the definition. And for those of you who have been exposed opposed to this concept, you probably know even more clearly. But before I share that with you, as you reflect on that video, how, if at all, do you think it's relevant to the notion of unconscious bias when, as you probably anticipate, we're going to be talking about how it operates in terms of inclusion, in terms of diversity. But before we get to that, what do you see? What did you see? How do you think that's relevant to this topic? Hi, and would you please tell me your name and when you speak?
John Fisher.
Hi, John.
It would seem to affect decision making.
Yes, yes. So the idea, and John, you went right to the root of this, is that we make so many decisions throughout the day about so many different kinds of things. And how many of you, by the way, are familiar with Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow? Really, really excellent in terms of neuroscience and how our brains operate. Really a good way I've learned to introduce this concept is really talking about how our brains have been wired, right? Not from birth, but how we've been kind of primed, how we've been conditioned, how we've been socialized related to making decisions. Moreover, in terms of the actual physiology, that we also will tend to make very fast decisions, or we can make slow, deliberate decisions. So yes, really associated with decision making. What else came to your minds as you experienced this video that you think is germane to our time together today? Yes, and you are? Hi.
I think we kind of just go with what we know, what we see in front of us, what we've always done.
Yes.
That's what we tend to do.
Yes, another really excellent point. So in terms of decision making and in terms of as we go through day to day, we often are on autopilot and we're basing our decisions, we're basing our behaviors on, often what people say is that's the way we do it around here, or that's what we've always done. And not even going to be that explicit, but also sometimes it's just without even thinking about it, it's okay, here's the way we do this, right? So that thinking fast just relies on how we've, again, been programmed or socialized. Excellent. Anything else? I'd love to hear one more thought.
Trina.
Yes.
McGuire. That we often assume we're right.
Yes.
We're right.
Mm-hmm.
We're a little disturbed if we're not, because we're pretty sure we are.
That's another outstanding point in service of the idea of thinking about how unconscious bias may operate in our lives in ways that actually are counter to, I believe everybody in this room would want to engage in a more inclusive workspace. I believe everybody in this room believes in equity and equality. And yet, when it comes to, first, this video, as you say, Steve, was about how our brains operate, kind of everyday sort of situations, divorced from the idea of looking at human beings and thinking about how we may make decisions, we may do things, right, related to other human beings. But so it's sort of divorced from that, and yet really, really significant in terms of that idea of thinking that one is right. And also the idea of the assumptions. And you know how assumptions work. How do you ever even realize you've assumed something incorrectly? You think you know it, but how do you ever even know that you did? When you're wrong, after all, right? And you push up against it. And so it's really important I found that it really helps, because that idea of people thinking that they're right is crucial to inviting us all to realize that we're not always right. That doesn't make us unintelligent, right? That doesn't make us incompetent. Moreover, it's connected to the idea that sometimes the ways that our unconscious biases may affect our behaviors or our attitudes is detrimental to other human beings, and actually could be characterized as ist, racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic, etc., right? And that doesn't mean, however, that's how you think, what you believe, or your values, but some people resist this because they don't want to be associated with anything that smacks of ist, right? Any kind of ism. But back to how we've all been socialized and how we've all been indoctrinated about many things in life, and in particular, for our purposes today, how we've been indoctrinated about other human beings, right? We will push up against it. All of us are likely to engage in behaviors until and if someone helps us recognize we've been assuming, we've been operating under those kinds of dominant belief systems. We may not even recognize it. Moreover, we probably don't even step back to think about whether we're right or wrong, because we also socialize ourselves. I think it's particularly a Western world dynamic of wanting to be right, almost no matter what. So really this says, thanks to the three of you, you've helped us set the stage very nicely in terms of what we're going to cover, continue to cover during our time together. So remember then, the goals are, based on the title, Unconscious Bias Matters. Unconscious bias is something that's significant. There are many significant issues or matters to think about. I hope you'll have more clarity about what it is, why it matters, and what to do about it. So for that, I want you to think about what else you could be doing right now, and let that go because you're doing this. And I'll do the same thing, right? Because it really aligns with the idea of how our brains work and how most of us are so privileged when our brains are functioning well that we can track and do a lot of different things, right? But I'm asking that we all agree we're going to set our intention to be fully present. You agree to that? Yes. Fully present, fully receptive. What does that mean for you if I say you're going to be receptive? Anyone? Open-minded, right? And I would add to that open-hearted, because if you really do value inclusion, you really want to have a workplace where you and everyone else feels as if people are striving to respect and value you and what you bring, then it's important that every single one of us has that kind of mindset and heart set. So to be present, to be receptive, and finally, to be responsible for your own learning. You agree to do that? And what does that mean for you when I say I want you to be responsible for your own learning? We only have 40 more minutes, so somebody needs to speak up. Responsible for your own learning. There's no right or wrong answers. I mean, really, when you think about that for yourself, what does it mean in this moment? Yes, and you are? Hi. Hi.
It's to be accountable for what you take in.
Yes.
And then what you take in, and then what you give back out.
Yes, thank you very much. That captures it extremely well. So and by the way, I'm in this with you. I always appreciate these opportunities because I learn something more or something goes deeper for me in terms of doing this work. So for all of us to be accountable, I've indicated that I'm going to share some specific, tangible, actionable items by the time we're done, but I don't want you to wait on me. In fact, I'll probably try to stop at least twice to check in to say, so, in fact, I'll do it right now. Let's say we stopped right now and I said, okay, that's it. Been lovely to spend 20 minutes with you all. What can you take away just from the time we've had already? What would be a to-do item? What would be an aha that could help you in terms of being more inclusive and thinking about being in the workplace? Anybody? Again, no right or wrong answers. This is about your being responsible. Yes?
Just after 10 minutes being intrigued enough to want to take it on myself to learn more and maybe go get the book.
Excellent, excellent point. So that's that of being accountable, right? That's that recognizing opportunities where you can grow and learn and not necessarily think you have it all right. I love that. I'm a lifelong learner and I love doing this work because I would be out of my work ethic and integrity if I wasn't asking you to learn and grow, if I wasn't continuing to do it myself. Very nice. Yes, you had something also? And you are?
I'm Kate Taft.
Hi.
And I came in a little bit late, but even
That's
for the
okay.
few minutes that I've been here, being fully present
Yes.
at work. My mind is always on the next thing or the last thing or the other 4 things I need to do before I leave.
Yes.
It's hard to turn all that off, so.
And that is a crucial aspect of mitigating unconscious bias, of being fully present. And in that being fully present, to be open-minded and open-hearted, to recognize that you may indeed have done or said something that reflects how good a job society has done on us in terms of prejudice and discrimination against other people, including people like yourself, right? So this notion of unconscious bias is not limited to people who are members of the dominant categories. If we said, for instance, gender, where male and masculinity, society has taught us, right, that that's a more valuable position than women or gender non-conforming. And by the way, again, that doesn't mean any of us believe it, but we've all been indoctrinated in that regard. And the idea is that we all may be likely to leak through our behaviors how good a job society has done on us. So thank you all for that. And with that, let me briefly define what I even mean by unconscious bias. Let's start with the word bias. Bias. So first of all, bias is not a four-letter word, is it? In terms of it being, you know, four-letter word like a curse word or something bad or something negative. It's a four-letter word, B-I-A-S, but in terms of how in Western society we talk about things are negative, right? So it's not a curse word, it's nothing bad. When I say bias, what comes to mind for you? Just as a general concept in society, bias. In fact, let's do a quick word association. Just call out bias.
An opinion.
Opinion. Discrimination. Preconception. Favoritism. Preference, right? And how many of you have biases? All of us do, right? Does anybody have a favorite color? Okay, mine is purple. Does anybody have a favorite drink? Non-alcoholic. Oh, wow. I know. Okay, I need to hang out with this group. What happens at the end of the retreat, right? That you all go on. But you get my point that bias refers to everything that you all shared. And so it's a predisposition, a preference, an opinion, etc. And we all have them about a lot of different things. And we, to varying degrees, are aware of them or not aware of them. And that's the distinction between conscious bias and unconscious bias. So that's a basic definition. And for our purposes, though, we're talking about bias specifically as meaning prejudice. But again, prejudice even can be for or against. Prejudice, most of us would think of it as it relates to other human beings, and that's what I want us to do, even though recognizing that notion of a certain kind of drink, that's still a prejudice. But now we're going from the broad definitions down to the specifics for our time together today. And these biases can be about an individual, or from an individual, from a group, or from an institution. And they are visible or invisible to the degree to which they are conscious or unconscious. And we all have unconscious beliefs about a variety of things, as I've said already. And we all have those specifically as they come to thinking and talking about other human beings. And so that's our definition, that unconscious bias really refers to our tendency to have favoritism or to be prejudiced for or against particular social identity categories, right, based on how we've been socialized from actually birth from cradle to grave. And there are a lot of different sources. We'll talk about that in a moment. But it's those ways that we unintentionally may be relying on the kinds of perceptions and conceptions we've been taught about different groups. Can you all see that okay? I had eye exam earlier, so my pupils are still dilated. So if you can see it, that's fine, because I can see it here as well. So there are then different categories related to bias. And before I continue, do you feel clear on the definition of unconscious bias, or do I need to say more about it at this point? You feel pretty clear? Yes. Excellent. Thank you. So when we talk about unconscious bias, as I said, we've moved from that broad notion that we're all likely to have biases. We can be conscious, conscientious, we know them, or they can be embedded in ways that we're not even aware that they're there until and if something happens that someone points it out, or when we're vigilant, we realize that there's something we've unconsciously been making associations. These categories are some of many that are especially salient and significant in contemporary society. So when you look at all of these, probably if I asked you, and I'm not going to ask you, because I believe it's important not to even say things, right, that in our own way we might be reinforcing. So some people who do this kind of workshops or training may take, for instance, the category of gender, and then say for that category, for all these categories, there are types of hierarchies that society has taught us in terms of valuable or superior down to inferior or not valuable. Again, this is not how we believe, but how society has tended, right, in a variety of ways to indicate a value system. So what we could do, I could say for you, so with gender, typically women or non-conforming gender categories are the ones that society has taught us are less superior or inferior. And then if I asked you what are some stereotypes about women in general, could you, I don't want you to do it, but could you list stereotypes about women? Right? If we looked at race and we thought about different racial categories, if I pulled one out, could you list stereotypes about racial ethnic groups? Even the ones you're a member of? Maybe even more so, right? Okay, so you get my point here, that all of those are in there. Now you go back to our opening video, what does that suggest in terms of when we're engaging with other people might occur? Any ideas? Going right back to the video. Yeah, what all y'all said. Yeah, that's good. No, actually, I would like to honor by hearing each of you. Yes, and you are?
One of the first things that you think.
Yes. Yes.
You jump to that conclusion.
Yes, exactly. You may jump to a conclusion. By the way, remember, we're talking primarily about you're not even aware of it. And therefore, you might do something based on that conclusion that actually is contrary to your own actual beliefs. So what I call this is TUI, thinking under the influence, right, of ways we have been socialized about different groups. One of my most recent ones was that in my role as Chief Diversity Officer, I can hire students to do various projects for me. And I was really pleased this academic year to hire a student whose identity composite was one I hadn't hired before. And again, I'm being intentional not to say I hired a right, put the category on, because I don't want to unintentionally reinforce any stereotypes. And I found myself thinking, okay, so I'm gonna have this student send me a report every week, check in with me, and I caught myself. I said, why are you going to treat this student different from the students you've hired across the years? Because the other students has been, we have an agreement, they can put their time card online. I love that I can help students because most of the assignments they get from me are online, so they can just do it when they have time to do it. But now I'm thinking with this student, okay, and weekly report, so I was like, okay, so what is that about, Brenda J? And I said, doggone it, you caught me again, thinking under the influence. Because the only explanation I could come up with was related to that student's identity. And I felt badly, but I also, and here's what I want, and I invite you to do is for you to intentionally try to catch yourself TUI. And when you do, be like me, because I'm the traffic cop, I'm the judge. It hasn't gotten to the judge yet, because I always let myself off with a warning. Okay, I'm gonna let you go this time. Just be careful, right? But I trust you get my point, is that we're all likely to do it. And so when I caught myself, it was just that reminder of how powerfully we have all been socialized. And you heard a little bit about my background. I've been doing this work a long, long time. I've myself experienced situations where I wondered if someone was responding more to an aspect of my identity, more and more of this gray hair, the silver, I should say, silver beauty, right? And humility. I see you picked that up. But how people will respond to me without seeming, first of all, to look at other cues to, maybe presume that I'm frail and that I don't have all of my mental faculties is really fascinating, right? And they're making that kind of quick sort of those assumptions based on cues that they pick up. So my point here is that we're all likely to do it. So yes, really important point. And what were you saying in response to, and you are?
I'm Vince Gator.
Hi, yeah. That we're just likely to draw upon them without being aware. How about you? Thank you.
I don't remember what.
Okay, it was good though. Yeah, it was good. Yes.
Just that it would influence the interaction.
Yes, yes, can influence our interaction. So all of those are excellent. And so my idea, yes, and you are, that's okay.
Is there something is there any studies or anything that talk about, because the only time I really feel like I assume something is when the situation isn't good.
Oh,
so
okay.
Example, when you said someone with gray hair, if I have any issue, and that's not real fair.
Silver hair.
I got mine 18.
We have silver.
Or platinum, we can go,
And I think of like if I have an issue or specifically driving and I see an older person driving and they have gray hair, I'm like, should they even be allowed to drive? It immediately goes, but it always seems to affect me in a negative situation where if I'm having fun or doing something that doesn't really matter, I don't think of it as wrong.
I think that really is a compelling question and example of how, first of all, how those biases might operate, and second, of our awareness, right? And it's back to the invitation to be open to kind of observe yourself throughout the day and the kinds of things, looking for patterns in which some of this might arise. And I do think that oftentimes when we're aware, it is based on something negative, and it may also align with the point that as we talk about these unconscious biases, we have them for or against certain groups, right? So we may be more in favor of a group and not even be aware of it because it seems positive, it seems like, and in fact, same thing with negative, that it's what we do and how we do it, and yet what eventually happens is that group or people in that group get more benefits, right? They get the benefit of your positivity. So I think that's a really good point in terms of something to be aware of as we engage with one another. Really good. Any other questions or comments before we proceed? So now I want to check in to ask, any to-do items based on what we've covered so far? Any actionable items, anything you can do differently or better or stop doing in terms of unconscious bias? Yeah, no more TUI, right? And really it's assigning yourself, and I find it fascinating when I really pay attention to myself, that notion of being fully present, when I strive to pay attention to what I'm thinking, how I'm processing, it's kind of fascinating. And I could let it disturb me, but I don't. And here's my invitation to you as well. Back to what as I said with my first example, that I just say, wow, society has done a job on me. And it's a very interesting dynamic for me, because then I think, good, I have a recent example to share with people, that I anticipate working with. Because people often say to me, whoa, when you said you do it, that just made me relax a little bit. Because none of us wants to think that anyone would view us as racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist, I mean, you name it, right? Islamophobic, etc. I think none of us wants to, except though for anyone who knows consciously that they believe they're better than because of identities, or they believe certain groups are better than. We're not talking about those people and those perspectives. And it's important to point that out. That's not what we're focusing on. And we have to acknowledge that those people exist, right? Those people exist. And I trust that, like most organizations, you all have mechanisms in place to allow for recourse, to allow for research and so forth to mitigate, disrupt, penalize, rehabilitate, et cetera, along those lines. Yes?
So the thought of unconscious bias to me means it's something that, like, we all work hectic schedules, and there are things
That's
that happen
good.
on day to day, and you're in and out of
Yes.
this meeting, this person, that person.
Mm-hmm.
So the thought of something unconsciously that hits you,
Yes.
to me, is not a bad thing,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you can recognize that it hit you, or that you have this bias. So the bias doesn't have to be, just because it's an unconscious bias that may come up in the middle of this hectic day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the benefit of recognizing that bias. It doesn't have to be a negative thing.
Yes.
It's just the fact that you were able to recognize, hey, I may have been biased in
And
that situation.
Mm-hmm.
you became conscious
You
of
became
it.
now conscious
Now
bias.
you're conscious of it.
Right.
That is really good. Actually, that covers a few different things. It's a very nice segue into recognizing that there are certain conditions where we're much more likely to display unconsciously ways that we're biased. And I think it's probably a hallmark of most workplaces that people are, busy, this thing, that thing. We think we multitask, but perhaps you've seen the neuroscience work which says we don't, right? We're still going sequentially even though we think we're doing a few things at once. So these conditions for bias matter. And then to your point that once we recognize it, but the challenge is how to even recognize it in the first place. And some of the ways include what we're doing, an invitation to be more thoughtful, to recognize how our brains work. It also includes having alliances with one another and agreeing that if you suspect something, you see something that might indicate an unconscious bias is operating, that on a one-on-one you share it. So I have another example of where, and this was earlier this year, one of my staff members said to me, when we were in the staff meeting that was combined offices the other day, it seemed to me that you gave much more attention to the males in the room than the females. So first of all, if someone ever points something out like that to me, and I encourage you to be the same way if you haven't thought about it, is I have to believe them that they perceived it, right? Because one of the ways that you can really where you can impede the potential for progress of stronger relationships and people feeling valued is to dismiss. So I could have easily have said, don't you know I do workshops on this? Don't you know I have awards for valuing women? So step back, right? I would never say or do it. I'm exaggerating on purpose. And I'm very happy to say to you that these days I'm practicing what I preach, is that I had to listen to her and I had to think back to what happened. And in doing all of that, my immediate thought was, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. I never intend for that to be the case, and I'm just going to watch myself from now on. And if you see it again, please let me know, because it really matters to me that everyone feels included and invited. So I forgot why I was even making that point, but it was a good one, right? No.
Upon reflection.
In your name?
Sorry, Alexis.
Hi. Yes.
Upon reflection, when she brought that up, so you said you're going to think about it, you didn't reject it.
Right.
Did you see where she was coming from?
Yes, I definitely did. Excellent question. Not only did I see where she was coming from, but I could explain it. However, I did not go back to her to say, here's what really was going on, right? Because I believe that would have still kind of minimized her observation. And I had to take, for me, the higher road. First of all, as being the expert, as being her boss, right? For me to then go back to say, okay, that was a good point, but here's what really was going on for me. And also, with that, I realized, even though I knew, so really, and I don't need to tell you all what it was, but I realized even though I knew, I still could be. And so my point to her of I would pay better attention and invite her, there were ways that I still could have accomplished when I could give my own rationale. I still could have done it better in ways that everyone would have felt included and involved. Excellent point. So looking at these conditions for bias, I think they're pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. Do any of those stand out for you as something we might take a moment to talk about?
Low effort thinking, what do you mean?
Low effort thinking is back to that how knee-jerk of how in the video it talked about priming, it talked about, so you're in a certain situation, like it said, eat soup or soap, wash whatever, or money, and approach the bank or whatever. We all have similar kinds of situations on our jobs where it's this task, so we don't really think that much about it, we just kind of do it, right? And that doesn't mean it's not something that is complex, right? Something that requires a certain level of expertise, so that's not it as well, so thank you for drawing that out. But it's more about whether or not you're fully present and thinking about what you're thinking about, as opposed to just like doing it. Another one to point out is salient social categories. It's kind of ironic that research shows when we're in the presence of someone that is indeed a member of a non-dominant category, so again with gender it would be women, gender non-conforming, or dominant would be men, masculinity, that we have a certain awareness of that ironically might actually trigger our implicit or unconscious biases. So it's kind of fascinating. And so that suggests just to be aware, right? So like when I was so excited about hiring that student, I could have taken my own advice to say, okay, so beware, since you're so aware of, wow, this is an unusual hire, and I'm so pleased that I have a person who's like in this category, that would have been an opportunity for me right then to say, so I need to be careful in terms of how I might behave as a result of that. And by the way, back to some of these, no, I won't do that for now, we'll come back to it. So those are some, and lack of feedback is really a crucial one, because if no one's sharing with us what they're observing, and also sharing it in a way that is inviting discussion and dialogue, not sharing it in a way as, gotcha, right? You're a racist after all, or you're a sexist after all, or you're, heteronormative because you did this. No, it's really more about, hey, here's what I observed. My example would be that I was on a search committee with a colleague who I noticed, and in fact it got a little funny for me because I found myself thinking, okay, I hope he does it every time. So then I could point out to say, every time, I didn't say it that way. But I observed, so let's say we're that search committee and you have we had a parade of people coming in to do an interview with the search committee. And as the chair, he would say to each person, he would call on someone and ask for them to ask a question. And I observed that he asked, every single time he called on one of the men in the room to be the person to ask the question. So at the end of that, and he kept it, except just for one time, he called on me, but ironically, he called on me to ask the diversity question. So I could also, invite him to think about what that might mean, right? And again, it's an invitation, not an indictment, with the idea of assuming that people are doing the best that they can do, especially if you've agreed that you're all gonna work on this and work on it together. And so I was confident he would receive it that way. And by the way, I did it afterwards. I did it when we were one-on-one, and I described it. I didn't say, I'm so surprised at you. You are so sexist. All you did was call on the men. Rather, I said, I just wanted to point out to you something I observed. And most people, it's hard to argue with what you've observed. And I said, each time you could call on a person to ask a question, you called on a male. And I thought you'd like to know that. And it's from my heart. I really know him, and I thought he would. He said, he did a little quick curse word. He said, thanks for letting me know. He was like a little ticked with himself for doing it. And so that would have been an opportunity for me to tell him that someone had recently pointed that out, same thing out for me. But I didn't. I wanted him to let roast a little bit. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I was able to honestly say, I've caught myself recently. You know, we're all subject to these kinds of biases. So that's a little bit in terms of the conditions. By the way, going back to those, what does that suggest for, again, how we can disrupt or mitigate bias if we know the conditions? We can try to control for the conditions, right? To be aware. And by the way, sometimes when we think we're in a rush, we think whatever, if you've ever paused just even for 3 seconds, that's a little longer than you probably think it is. So sometimes we think we're in such a hurry. Just pausing for a moment and centering can make a big, big difference. So even being aware of those, being aware that you may be tired or grumpy or hangry, right? Or something has happened, you know, at home or in an interaction where you realize something's going on with you emotionally. You may want to hold off on making a particular kind of decision or engaging in particular kind of behavior or interaction, or if you can't afford to do that, you can at least, again, it's phenomenal for those of us who, you know, have the kind of cognition that we're speaking to of how much we really can control more than we tend to control ourselves. So let's just take a few minutes and call out, why then does this topic of unconscious bias matter? And I'll say specifically here at Denver Water, even though it matters across our lives. Why does it matter? Just share anything whatsoever of why you think it matters.
It affects relationships.
Yes, it affects relationships. What else? Affects productivity. Hiring. Culture. Morale. Self-esteem. Right? Whether or not you're innovative and creative, research has shown if at any level someone feels that they're perceived to be less than, right, through ways that people engage with them, they may not show up as much, right? They may not be motivated. Similarly, for those of us, even in our positions of power or dominance, right? So for me as a straight person, I may be likely to engage in behaviors that are heteronormative, that are counterproductive, right? And also limit my own quality of life, my own potential for kinds of not only workplace relationships, but just thinking about how I do what I do. So this is not only about members of the non-dominant categories and what will or will not happen for them. This is about all of us, right? About all of us. And it obviously can shape our perceptions and decision-making. And by the way, thinking about decision-making and recognizing that everyone is susceptible to unconscious bias, I'm aware of our timing. I want to share this with you before I ask you to think just for a few minutes. And so be ready to think about what kinds of decisions do you routinely make at work, all right? And this is both related to your actual job as well as just engaging with one another. Before we do that, if we were doing some kind of project where this graphic mattered and I was your boss, and I said to you, okay, so we all can agree that the actual tabletops here, their actual width and length, they're different. Everyone agree? Raise your hand. Okay, we could move it on, right? You're saying no. What if I said these tabletops are exactly the same in terms of their width and length? Everybody agree? Okay, the rest of you don't agree? All right, let me tell you, I'm the boss. Remember, I'm the boss. And also remember, we're talking about how our brains operate. What's going on there is an optical illusion, that your brain is bringing in the information in a particular way of images that in real life are three-dimensional, so that in actuality, they really are exactly the same. Believe me now? Okay, be honest. Just a couple of you believe. All right. Why do you believe?
I read the book. I still don't believe it.
And you still don't believe it, right? So I like to punctuate this in terms, because it's, again, this is an invitation to know that your brain is often doing things, making decisions. In this case, it's a relatively kind of harmless, right, sort of mundane, but you and we are doing this when it comes to other human beings. We are. We are. So to bring the point home, nothing up my sleeves. All right. And we have that one. Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. Okay? And by the way,
Really different on the screen.
it's the same.
It does.
Does it look really, really different?
On up there,
Yeah, it looks more like the small one.
on the small one, yeah.
But it's still, doesn't it? This one looks longer to me. But this, exactly, that it makes you, so I've had people who still will come up afterwards, and you may, we could pass it around. But I just want to drive the point home. And by the way, this is not the same as implicit bias. I don't want to say that it is. It's just though about how our brains operate. We make decisions contextually according to who says it or what. You read the book, and so you're partially believing it. You even said, but I still don't quite, right? So what do you think is going on there that's related to unconscious bias? Anybody like baseball here? So what do you think could be going on here that's relevant to our topic today?
The ump's calling a strike before the pitching hits.
So the idea is decision making, right? And by the way, there's been over 30 years of research on these unconscious biases. How many of you heard of the resume studies? So resume studies ranging from, some of the first ones were about exact same resumes. The only thing different was black sounding names and white sounding names. Sent out to thousands of people. Again, the premise here is that people weren't aware. So they didn't look at Lakeisha and say, I don't want to hire Lakeisha. They just looked at everything and didn't choose Lakeisha as opposed to choosing Jennifer. Right? They've done it similarly for male-sounding names and female-sounding names, primarily Eurocentric names. They've done it for Asian, Arab, etc. Right? And so there's lots and lots of research. I don't have time to go through it all. I find for some audiences more than others, striving to understand that research and how we're making those decisions. And again, the premise is that we're not aware that we're making the decision for or against, but that we do. So this I recently found is pretty fascinating. It shows, this was research into the judgment of baseball umpires. 700,000 pitches thrown during 2008 and 2009. And what they found is that they make errors in ways that favor players who are established at the top of the game's status hierarchy. And this goes right along with what we're talking about, making decisions for or against people in a variety of ways, who we even acknowledge to say hello to, who we decide to hire or not, how we evaluate people, how we believe credible. If someone says, this happened in my life, it feels to me this might be because I'm blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, not really, you're too blah, 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 you know. So it goes on and on and on. So this found that umpires tended to favor all-star pitchers, first of all, that an umpire is about 16% more likely to erroneously call a pitch outside a zone, a strike, for 5-time all-stars than for a pitcher who had never been in an all-star game. Now this is based on precision of there's an actual strike zone. And these are experts who should be able to see it. But again, unintentionally, unconsciously, their awareness of who this pitcher is or isn't, right, influences it. They also found that they were 10% less likely to expand the zone for African American pitchers than for white pitchers, right? So the race piece comes into play, etc. So this was just one quick example. There's so many more that are alluded to here. I'm going to share this PowerPoint with you all. You can take a deeper look. We're running out of time, and I just want to be sure that we get through some of the specific things to do. I told you that I wanted you to think about decisions you make. When I have a longer time, I actually invite you to talk among yourselves, because I find that's also helpful for you to, continue to bond along these lines and so forth. And I encourage you, if there are ways that you can continue this conversation, that's something to think about. You've already alluded to things like hiring, recruitment, evaluation. It also is who gets particular kinds of favoritism, and that could range in so many different ways, in ways that we often think we're being objective. We may even invoke, here's our rubric, or here's the system we're using, but what happens is still leaks, right? Those prejudices, those assumptions that, there's research that was done on insurance agents which showed that even though it's very similar behavior, that the women contrasted with the men actually used different language themselves to describe what they did. So even though it was the same thing, right? And so in terms of evaluating, of believing one was more relational than authoritative, for example. So it really finds its way into a variety of things, decisions that we make that can, again, really negate an opportunity to be fully inclusive and respectful. So what to do? Let me pause for a moment before I power through some ideas. Anyone have, in addition to the idea of being fully present, the idea of doing more research, learning more about it, what else, was there another one we came up with? Can't remember, but please share a few before we power through the remainder of our time.
Everything is not as it appears.
Right, to be open, thank you, excellent point. Just to be open to, and in fact, I like kind of making it a game or an assignment with myself to say, what do I think is going on here and what else might be going on? Because what I find myself doing sometimes is recognizing my unconscious biases that are related to ways I've been socialized, specifically as a Black woman, to filter things in about things related to race and gender and their combinations, right? Now that's me. I'm not saying all Black women are the same, et cetera, but it's an invitation to think about, is there a particular identity composite for you, for yourself, of how you might be likely to engage with people like you, or how you might process. So then I say to myself, so what else could be going on, right? And then I realized, wow, lots of other things could be going on, even as it could also be there's some kind of explicit bias or implicit bias. So things we can do, start with being open to accepting that we all have them. I read something recently which said that sometimes this kind of training or professional development doesn't work because people leave thinking, well, I'm just human and I just do that. I hope our time together, you not only see that, but you're also human and you can do something about it. I hope you also understand that this matters greatly. We haven't had a time to go deeply into just how significant it is and how much a difference it can make if we own up to it and are willing to change and do better for each other. Yes?
So that actually leads to one of the things that I'm pulling away is the conditions for bias with the ambiguity.
Yes.
The part that bothered me so much about that list is the other ones seem to be a little bit more either quick thinking or emotion based, where the ambiguity one bothered me most because to me it feels like a personal sense of laziness. Like if you're in a situation where there's ambiguity and you either don't feel comfortable to ask a question,
yes,
or there isn't any information to really support a decision making kind of thing, then it's probably a bad situation.
Yeah, I think that's another really powerful point, and it's a thing to be aware of, right, what's going on. And it's also, when we think about this as an institutional or organizational level, if you all can agree, whether it starts with, if you're in a smaller unit, the people who you work directly with, and up and up or out and out, agree that you're going to strive to reduce ambiguity, you're going to be open to asking questions, trying to get clarity. And this is not necessarily easy to do, but you have to have a sense of safety. It might be uncomfortable, but yeah, really, really important point. Thank you so much. Commit to managing that's bolded, because people say, I just wish so-and-so was here. It's like, that person isn't here, you are. Really, and it's so important to start with yourself. It really is. And especially those of us who are aware that people may be likely to be biased against us, to also recognize we may also, but also recognize in ways that people may be seeming to demonstrate unconscious biases against us. That's an invitation to, first of all, consider that they're not aware. And if you have agreement that you're going to try to point things out, then you describe. You don't say you are a, but you say, here's what I observed, here's how that made me feel, and you go from there. Learn more, TUI, redirect any guilt or shame. So you notice when I was talking about I could have easily have gone, not really, because I'm like lived long enough and get this stuff to say, I'm being gentle on myself. I'm not going to hold back, but you know, if you're likely to feel that, to redirect it, to say, okay, wow, this stuff is pretty powerful. I care enough about making a difference in the world. I'm just going to keep trying to get better, rather than kind of wallowing in it or maybe becoming defensive. Or if you do, also go with that for a minute, right? Don't strive to be perfect when it comes to these issues. Implicit association tests, really fascinating if you haven't heard of them. There, I give you the website there, ask for feedback. Little things you do or say can make a difference. And again, if you invite people to share with you, even check yourself out. Research shows that when you're in a room, people will tend to look primarily at the person they think has the power more than anybody else. I just experienced it. It was very fascinating for me that, I won't give you the details, but I decided not to take it personally and just to understand that person was probably enacting without being aware of it, of looking primarily at one person when it was really a conversation, a presentation for everybody. So there are little things we can do or say that may kind of tell our biases. Look for something that's counter to a stereotype. And then when you find that counter stereotype, don't then kind of slip into, well, that person's exceptional, but rather think, and there may be thousands of other blank blank people who can do yada yada yada, right? And I want to be open to that. See each person as a whole complex individual, even as you also understand that person may have experiences based on their identities, pro or con, right? Based on being a member of a dominant group, that they're accustomed to certain kinds of things. It's not their fault. So privilege is like saying to a fish, how's that water? And the fish is saying, what water, right? It's not the fish's fault that it's enjoyed those privileges. It is, however, if the fish is open-minded and willing to understand that they may have had some advantages that come primarily with being born into them and others may not, then that's very different. So this is about all of us and all of us being open to changing and growing and learning. You know the platinum rule? Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. And there are ways you can find that out. I just need to power through because I really do I can't explain all of these. I will be sharing this PowerPoint with you, as I said, but I do want to respect our time, and we're already out of it. And just invite, as we close, for you to think about what, if anything, you might stop doing, what, if anything, you might become more cautious about, and what, if anything, are you just going to really try to go forward from here in service of recognizing that unconscious bias matters. Thank you.
Not that you're the one with the least amount of bias for picking them up over there. And then there's pizza in the back, guys. Sorry it came late, but there's 4 pizzas back there. Please take a piece or two.